Subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the bell icon for the latest film interviews, features, and recommendations on the movies that matter. It's good to see you, Mr. Yeon Sang-ho. You created this very thrilling world in Train to Busan. What was most interesting to you about telling another story about survival and revisiting this world that is overrun by zombies?
일단은
So first of all, at the time, I was a director of animation, the particular title being Seoul Station. And at the time, we were in the planning stages. And my purpose with that piece was to create sort of a black comedy that takes a look at the social issues of the time. So we were just beginning to do that. And actually, this particular piece is about one night, a story that happens during one night in Seoul Station. So I got to thinking, what would happen the next day? What would happen after that night? And that's where it started.
사실은 이제 부산으로 가는 기차에 좀비가 타게 되는 이야기를 구상하게 되었습니다.
While zombies are common to both films, both to Train to Busan and Peninsula, I think it's fair to say that where Train to Busan was really a flat-out horror film, Peninsula feels more like an action adventure. What was the intention behind practically switching genres while staying within the same universe?
사실은 지금도 되게 여러 가지 종류의
Well, currently I am in the process of creating a different, wide variety of different series. And in the beginning, when Seoul Station and Train to Busan were both introduced to the public, I thought it was really interesting and fun because the two were very different. Seoul Station was a very low budget animation and the tone and manner was very different from that of Train to Busan. And Train to Busan, as you know, was a blockbuster disaster film. I thought it was very interesting how these two were a pair while they were being so different from each other. And I'm currently creating a lot of different new series. And as for the series that stand foot in the same universe with Train to Busan, I want to make sure that all of them have different colors and different formats. So I think this is something that's very interesting, and that's the direction that I want to take.
그런 시리즈물이 나오는 것도 꽤 재미있겠다라는 생각을 지금도 하고 있습니다.
It's very interesting that you say that because one of the things that strikes one about Peninsula is just how different it is in texture from Train to Busan. The colors, the color palette, really the starkness of the landscape, of the dystopian landscape. Can you talk about that? So much of the film takes place in the night, which is not the case in Train to Busan. Why was it important for you to give it a completely new texture, even though it exists in the same universe?
부산행의 굉장히
With Train to Busan becoming such a hit, there was a lot of discussions about a sequel to that movie. And as a creator of films, I'm not very interested in creating something that's very similar to what I've already created. So I knew that I always wanted to do something completely new. And from then, we started the initial planning for the movie Peninsula. And I thought that because Peninsula would be so different from Train to Busan, that was what drew me to this particular piece. And because it would be so different, that's when I thought it would be interesting and okay to go forth with a sequel.
그때부터 좀 가졌던 것 같아요.
One of the very interesting thematic choices that you make with this film is that this time, the fear is not so much of getting infected by the zombies. It's actually a fear of the survivors who've been left behind. Why was that something that interested you?
At the initial planning stage, I thought a lot about what story to tell. And I asked myself, what would happen in a situation where people that were isolated, people that felt very desperate, what if they let go of all hope? What would happen then? And also another question was, how would people then find hope despite such circumstances? For example, and I believe these two could actually be the main characters of the whole film, would be the young characters, Jun and Eugene. And for them, they actually are more used to the post-zombie infection world rather than before how the world was. And this whole situation that they find themselves in, that has become their norm. And so through that kind of story, I believed that that message could be conveyed in an effective manner.
I also think it's very interesting that Peninsula puts female characters front and center of the action in a way that not a lot of films do. Also, each of the female characters, the mother and her two daughters, have very specific action skills. Can you talk about why it was important that these women play empowered action roles?
The film Peninsula is the backdrop of the film is a fallen world, and in a fallen world, things that used to support the old version of the world have all fallen, and by that, of course, it includes public power, and and this is the reason why systems like the army, which were used to really hold up the previous world in place, all of them have fallen apart and disintegrated. And I wanted people and entities that were not really major players in the former world to come to the front and lead their way in the new world. And that includes children. Character like Jung Seok, of course, he was also a figure that we could see as part of the system that held up the former version of the world. And now in the fallen world, he feels a sense of great responsibility. And also he is paying a price for what he has done in the previous world. And in a very heavy sense of guilt, he meets Min Jung and these people, and it is in the film is a process of him becoming recovered from his guilt.
The car chase scenes in this film are very nicely done, and they're also reminiscent of the Mad Max films. And you have said that that film was in fact an inspiration for Peninsula. What are some of the other films that inspired the zombie scenes, the dystopian imagery, the action scenes? You've said that you're a big fan of the 80s and 90s Hollywood films.
Yes, like you said, I am a big fan of 90s films and also of Japanese anime. In the case of movies like Mad Max 2, that was actually my very first post-apocalyptic movie, and also movies like Waterworld have inspired me a lot. As for the car chasing scenes in Peninsula, I wanted it to have a sort of a comic-like look to it. So not only in Mad Max, but also there's a Japanese anime titled Mahagogo, and in that anime, there is a scene where a young boy drives a huge car, and I sort of wanted June to be in a scene much like that. I thought it would be really fun to have this young girl drive a huge car and make that scene very memorable.
You made this movie long before the global pandemic, but it's impossible to watch this film and not think of the virus, to not think of the threat of infection. These themes are eerily resonant today. What perspective do you hope that the film will give to viewers at this point in time?
Yes, like you said, when I was planning Peninsula, I could of course not predict the pandemic. However, what I thought was encouraging and consoling was that the message that I wanted to convey through this film was very befitting to the current situation, and I was happy to see that. I think the very last line of the movie, through the words of June, it really encapsulates the message that I wanted to convey in the film. And I believe that message is that it's not about where you are, but it's more about who you're with. I believe that is more important. And so I think in the world of today, it's not so much about the situation, but about what kind of people you are with, and what kind of people have the kind of the mindset you are in. And I think that is the important question. And that was the question that I held on to as I created this film.
Peninsula is very clearly a big screen movie with its post-apocalyptic stark landscape, its car chases, and those fantastic action scenes. But in many parts of the world, including India, there is great uncertainty, even today, about just when it will be completely safe to go back into the cinemas. How do you look at the way that cinema and the film business has been impacted by the coronavirus? I mean, this film was selected for Cannes And of course, the festival couldn't happen, and it's reached out in different ways. How do you look at the way that the film business has been affected by the coronavirus, and just the uncertainty over when theaters will become safe again?
In Korea, we have taken quite a blow in the Korean cinema industry due to COVID-19. In fact, at the time of launch in box offices in Korea, it seemed to be a little bit better. Situations seemed to be a little bit better, but then afterwards it went downhill again. So the Korean cinema is really taking a blow. And at the time of production for the film, although we weren't in a pandemic situation then, it was a time when I personally thought a lot about what it really meant to visit the cinema and what the cinematic experience really meant when you see it on the big screen. And I think that was one of the reasons why I wanted to create a film that was truly entertaining and truly fit for the big screen with Peninsula. If current situations persist, I personally also think a lot about how the film industry should change and in what way we should change. And I believe that is true of the overall Korean film industry as well. But what I can be sure of is that this current situation will definitely not go on forever. And I do have hope and trust that the film lovers will continue to really remember the joy of visiting the theater to watch their beloved films on the screen. And I hope that one day we will be able to enjoy that once again.
기획을 해야겠다라는 생각을 가지고 있습니다.
And finally, the success of Parasite in America and at the Oscars, it appears to have sort of increased the interest from the West in Korean cinema. Do you notice that? And what do you hope that the success of Parasite will do for cinema from South Korea?
It's true that in the United States in particular, they seem to have become a lot more open toward films created in the Korean language. And I have also heard that there's actually films and drama series being produced in the United States in Korean. And by that, I mean the language. And although nothing has been made concrete yet, there are, I believe, in Korea, pieces and films that are being produced in the Korean language, but with a more global direction. I think that the Korean film industry is standing at a very important point in time where what really matters would be what kind of other and more films that will follow the success of Parasite. So I also hope that the route that these films are distributed could become more diversified, and I believe all of these changes will contribute to creating a more diverse film industry for Korea.
영화 산업으로 만들 거라고 믿고 있습니다.
Thank you, Mr. Yeon Sang-ho. I enjoyed watching Peninsula, and I'm looking forward to watching how you expand the universe. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.